Louisville, national champions, 1980.
Cardinals have won the national championship. 75th NCAA college basketball champions.
Hello again, everybody. It is my pleasure to be back for another episode of the Third Banner Pod. I am your host tonight, Kyle. I'm also joined by Pat, and we are going to break down what appears to be the final roster construction for the Louisville basketball program under new head coach Pat Kelsey. We will also be joined by Locked On Louisville's Dalton Pence. He'll be joining us here in a little bit, so we'll bring him on, get some of his takes. But, man, Pat, how do you feel looking at this roster as a whole right now with, he did it in less than 2 months. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, the start of this roster build was incredible. It took a little bit of time there in the middle, and now the finish has been pretty awesome too. I think when you step back and look at the overall roster, you've got a deep and versatile team that you can do a lot of different things with and match up with people in different ways. So I'm excited, man. I think, on paper, Louisville basketball is back.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, man. I really think we have some really solid pieces. You could argue we don't have that superstar player to take us over the top to like on a big long tournament run, but I really do think we have a couple of star players that are that next level, like Edwards, for example, Fats, and then you also have Case and Pryor. I think both of those guys can be stars, can be impactful, not like on a level of, when I guess like when Kansas got Hunter Dickinson, we didn't get a transfer portal guy quite like that. But we have a bunch of really complementary pieces, a bunch of dogs, by the way, which I think is very important. The mentality. We're going to talk trash. We're going to talk trash. We're going to be all about that. We're not going to be afraid of anybody. I don't think we're going to be intimidated. Whatever we were used to under the previous regime, all of it's gone. All of it. Aiden McCool is the final remnant left at the end of the bench of the Kenny Payne era. And other than that, you will not recognize anything. And I absolutely love it. Couch House, good to see you in here. Phil, Robert, Danny, Laura. It's good to see all you guys in here tonight. We're going to be bringing on Locked On Louisville's Dalton Pence here in a little bit. He's going to break down how he feels about the roster as well. But who are you, Pat, before we bring him on, who are you most excited to see next year? We added Waterman. We added Frank Anselem. Out of all the guys now, who are you most excited about?
Yeah, I mean, you could pick probably 7-8 guys, and you wouldn't.
You could.
Nobody would put you down for picking one of those 7-8 guys. I'm going to stick with the guy I was probably most excited about when we added him, and that's Corin Johnson.
Good pick.
He's my type of guy. He's a bulldog type guard that is going to play defense. Can attack the rim, and a guy that's he can fill it up quick, and he's the type of guy I like to watch. He's a Russ Smith type of guy. He's not as talented as Russ, but a guy that's going to get after it on both ends and can go from 0 to 12 points in 2 or 3 minutes. So I think he's the guy I'm most excited for.
I'm having a hard time picking. a guy. I think today, and this changes every day, but if you ask me today, I would say Abubakar Traore, because he's 6, he's not tall compared to the way he plays. Now he's got a big wingspan, but he's what, like 6'6", 6'5", and plays out of his mind. I think he's had 20 plus rebounds in 3 games already. And when you look at his stats against guys like Ballo, who's now at IU, but was at Arizona, he more than holds his own against impact fives. And I'm curious to see, because I did not sit around watching Long Beach State play basketball games. I'm sorry. I'm not that into it now. And with the way we've been, I haven't been a college basketball junkie like I used to be. When Louisville's not good, it's harder for me to get into the entire sport. So I did not see a lot of Abubakar Traore, but based on looking at his highlights, looking at his stat lines, I am curious to see how that actually looks when he goes up against a big man and he's just like blocking shots on a guy who's 6'11", 7 foot, who's a dominant big man, who he's blocking them out, getting rebounds over, like driving on the lane and just like scoring over them. I cannot wait to see how that looks. But I don't know, man. It's hard for me to nail down. That's who I'd pick today. But I mean, it might change tomorrow, man. There's a lot of guys I'm happy about on here.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, me and you could sit here. I mean, we could spend half an episode and, tandem going back and forth about why we pick about 7 or 8 players on this roster as our favorite pickup. So it's going to be fun. We have those guys that we like right now. It's going to be fun to see them in action.
Yeah.
And, I'm one of those guys. I develop a favorite player, especially in today's age, over the first, 5-10 games of the season. I'm like, yeah, this guy's probably my favorite. So, 10 games into the season, we'll have this discussion again, and I'm sure I'll have a different answer. But yeah, I'm pumped to see this roster in action, man.
Yeah, for sure. So I did want to bring on, we have Locked On Louisville's Dalton Pence joining us to talk about this roster as well. We talk to Dalton all the time, so he's no stranger to the show, and I've been on his show, and we do spaces sometimes where I join in spaces. So without further ado, welcome to the Third Banner, Paul Dalton. How are you tonight?
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. What's going on, fellas?
Oh, man, rookie mistake by a veteran in the field.
Dude, no kidding.
I'm always intimidated by your voice, Dalton, when you get on stuff like this. I start getting subconscious about how I sound. So you've got that radio voice, man.
He does have a good radio voice.
Listen here, Pat, dude. I'm just trying to grow up and be just like you, bro.
Yeah. You can aim higher, man. You can aim higher.
So Dalton, the roster appears to be complete. And how are you feeling about it today?
I mean, I feel good. I think that all three of us in this chat understand. Shout out to Blue Collar Boy, by the way. I don't know about an obsession with Maverick Rowan, but it's probably close to that as it can be. But I think all three of us in this little virtual room understand that if Louisville wants to add another player and they're hell-bent on adding another player, then that opportunity is going to arise. So the quote-unquote final product of the roster, I think that if Louisville was to roll out the roster they have today, you have to feel very good about it. I think you add your star-level guys, your starting caliber players, and then meaningful depth. I don't really think that there is one thing that Pat Kelsey didn't address. You could say rim protection, but I think that's a little bit overblown. It seems like all the boxes were pretty much checked off from what you were hoping to get in the portal.
We went from one 6'10" guy and a bunch of guys that were 6'5", 6'6", 6'7", and then other guys that are smaller than them. And then in like 10 days, we have 4 guys that are now 6'10". So in 10 days, that whole thing has been addressed. That whole we don't have enough bigs, completely addressed. Now, I think that's going to lead me into what I say now, as far as before I give my take on what are the keys to reach your maximum potential, to reach your ceiling. I will hand that off to you guys. Dalton, I'll start with you. In order to reach whatever ceiling we have, what needs to happen with this roster as far as who on the roster needs to have the biggest impact, or, how does it all come together? Just what do you envision happening in order to reach our maximum potential?
Well, I don't necessarily think it's a matter of who as much as it is a how. When you're replacing all 13 players, a roster on paper might look fantastic, which in this case it does. But the main thing is getting it all to mesh on the court and be cohesive and have a set rotation. And to answer your question, what needs to happen is you have to have the guys buy into, number one, what you are preaching. And we've seen what happens when guys do not buy in. But you also have to have clear-cut, defined roles for these players. I understand that you're going to have a lot of positionless basketball thrown out there. That doesn't work unless you have the players within the system understanding what it is that they're being relied upon to do on the court. Now, I'm not just talking about scoring the basketball, although that is a portion of it. You have to understand, who's on the court to be the solid point of attack defender, who's going to be relied upon to switch. Communication has to be up there as well. So I like that the season is 6 months away. You have time. But again, I think that multiple players can fill multiple roles, but you have to understand what it is you're being asked to do on the court. This is where Pat Kelsey is really going to make his money, having to make these decisions and get guys to buy in.
What about you, Pat? What would you need to see to think, okay, if this happens, we're going to be really good?
Yeah, I think to first of all expand on what Dalton said. We've got a lot of guys coming in here who were number one, number two type options for their team. So I think the first obstacle with this roster is getting guys to buy into the fact that we've got 10 of those guys now that came from other programs that might have been the 1, 2, 3 for their programs respectively. But now some of those guys are going to have to adjust to different roles. You may not be the number one scorer. We may need you to facilitate. We may need you to play off ball more. We may need you to play on ball more. So, adjusting to your new roles with a new team, I think, is going to be key to reaching our max potential. And then to kind of go away and look at something else that Dalton didn't discuss. I think there is one player on this team that if he levels up and takes the next step is going to be key for us being like maybe a tournament team to maybe a second weekend team. And I think that's James Scott. I think if he levels up,
took my answer
as a sophomore, and can be that real rim protector and give you 20, 25 minutes, provide a little bit of a low post presence on offense and not just do what he did last year and rim run and get offensive rebounds for putbacks, then you're looking at a team that has very little flaws. So those are my two big things I'm going to look at as best case scenarios for this team.
Yeah. So I to kind of piggyback off Pat's point, in order for this team for me to reach their maximum potential, obviously injuries are always a thing. So that goes without saying. This is all assuming that we just have 100% positive health, good health, which doubtful, but hey, we'll go there. We'll pretend. Just hypothetically, everybody stays healthy all year. James Scott, if he can gain 20 pounds of muscle this offseason and just add something to his offensive game besides dunks and layups, just if it's a little hook shot, a little floater, it doesn't have to be like, if he can somehow come, because he has something that the other big men don't, which is the ability to be an elite defensive player, and he has superb athleticism compared to the other bigs. Now, he doesn't have the guard skill set as like a Kaysen Pryor has, but he has elite athleticism and bounce that the other big men do not have, but he needs to get bigger. He needs strength. So if he can somehow put on 20 pounds, because we don't have a guy, we do not have a guy yet, at least down low, that is a banger, a big guy that you cannot push around down there. And 20 pounds even on James Scott still doesn't make him like a big, massive guy. but he could take that punishment with an extra 20 pounds. That is asking a lot, and I don't even know if the strength and conditioning staff have that same idea, and they may say, no, we're good with where he's at right now, and that's not where we're going. But that's from my standpoint, that would take us to another level because I think we have the shooting. I think we have good perimeter defenders out there. Chucky Hepburn's a good defender. Corin Johnson's a good defender. Hadley's a good defender. Edwards is a formidable defender. And then you have good shooting, and then you have Edwards who can create his own shot. You got a lot of offensive potential, but the 5 spot on defense, I think, will be where we can either take a step back and maybe not reach our full potential if it doesn't work out, or we could actually do better than even we think if we can somehow get somebody like a James Scott to put on a little weight, in my opinion, and add a little bit of offense where you keep a defender honest, where they can't just go play off of you and not have to worry about you.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you, Kyle. I think that's the missing piece to this team is a true low post presence. We've got some rim protectors now, but we don't have a guy that can play back to the basket. And we don't have a guy that, as of right now, wouldn't get bullied by like a DJ Burns, although most people are going to get bullied by him. And luckily we don't have to play him this year. But, you get a big-bodied dude, then I think that's where we could have some issues with our current roster. And so, I agree with you. If you can get Scott to put on a little bit of weight and take that sophomore leap too, then you're really going to surprise people next year, I think.
So is there anything you guys, I won't say don't like, that might not be the right. Is there anything that you look at and you're like, I don't know about it. I'm questioning a little bit. Dalton, what about you? Anything?
Well, I think that you pretty much hit the nail on the head. The good thing about the roster construction is that it feels like it's just a big puzzle. It's a bunch of puzzle pieces that fit into one larger, contraption. And I think that you have a multitude of players that can fill defensive roles, shooting roles, ball handling. We actually have guards this year. Who would have thought that those type of players were out there? But it's rim protection. And I also, if we're getting really, really critical here, like hypercritical, you could maybe say guard depth, like point guard depth. Because I don't think people understand just how much Chucky Hepburn and Corin Johnson are going to coexist in the backcourt. Even if you don't think that they are going to start, you're probably misguided if you feel like that they're not going to spend a ton of time together. I personally think that both of them should start because then you treat it sort of in a staggering situation to where you can mask over some of that depth. They start out together and then they sort of flip-flop up until the very end and then they play together. But I think you all basically said it. It is a true interior presence. And you have guys that can be like pseudo big men and fill respective roles here and there. But you don't have a guy if we were to go up against Omar Ballo tomorrow, I would worry. And thankfully,
Traore held his own.
Yeah,
throw him out there.
Yeah, but if they play, that is true.
I know.
You understand what I'm saying here? It's just a matter of. Thankfully, the ACC doesn't have an Armando Bacot this season or a DJ Burns to where I was looking at the rosters. There's not a ton of those type of big men in the conference. So conference play, Louisville should be fairly well off. It's the NCAA tournament that you're focusing on. But I agree with you all. If James Scott can take that perceived next step, and it doesn't have to be all ACC level, just where he shows he can be a serviceable rim protector. And also give me a little semblance of a baby hook, something in the paint that's not just dunks, because Rome wasn't built in a day. He's not going to come in right away and average 15. But if he can show that skill set is being refined, then I think that you definitely can raise a ceiling based on what you see year two. So again, it's all hyper magnifying at this moment, but I'll probably go with you all in the front court.
Yeah, I think if there's one thing I question about this roster construction, I do worry a little bit about only having 11 guys. Everybody keeps saying we have 13 guys on the roster. I hate that terminology because we don't for next year. We have 11 guys. We have 2 guys on scholarship, but they're not on the next year's roster. They're not. You can't sub them in. So that does worry me a little bit because PK does like to play 10-man rosters, 10 men on a regular basis, or at least up to this point he has. Now, does that not mean he won't adjust now that he has a little bit less players? No, I mean, he could, but I can only go off of what he's done so far. He plays very up-tempo, and he likes to play a lot of players because of that. Well, when you have 11 scholarship players, a couple of injuries, you're down. So I kind of wish, personally, I would like 13 players that can all play. I just like that for safety reasons. Obviously, your 10 through 13 guys aren't going to be stars, but they just need to be able to come in, plug and play, spot duty. And then if you do have injuries, you have enough depth at least to get through them if you have 3 or 4 injuries, because that's not uncommon to have 3 or 4 injuries at once. We just had it last year a lot of the season. So I say all that because I do wish we at least had 12. I wish, and I still think, I know that right now what's being said is that we're definitely set with the roster, and that's just how it's going to be. It's going to be these 11 guys. The other 2 guys are on scholarship, but they're redshirting. I think if the right person comes available, probably a guard. And by right person, I don't have anybody in mind. I'm saying, like, over the summer, something happens. Somebody's granted a waiver, and it's a guard, and they can be like a third man, a third or fourth guard that comes off the bench. I could see us looking at that and then using NIL money towards Kobe Rogers scholarship, for example. So I don't think it's a set in stone, as some people are saying. I just think as of today, the staff is probably saying Kobe Rogers is on scholarship because as of today, he probably is. I would like to see one more guard. Kind of Dalton alluded to a little bit earlier, but I would like to see that. And then I would feel much better.
Yeah, I think I can't think of another thing that worries me other than the couple things you guys mentioned. But I am going to talk about, the way Pat Kelsey is going to.
It's going to be hard.
Patrick Kelsey.
I know, man. Is going to handle this roster with rotations and stuff because, like you said, at Charleston, he went 10 deep. And it wasn't just like 10 deep, like,
yeah, I mean, it was a lot
every so often he played 10 guys. Like, it was almost every game he'd go 10 deep, and guys would, the 10th guy would play 8 to 10 minutes. So is that going to be different now that he's playing Power 6 basketball, or is it going to be the same? Because, like you said, if he uses that strategy again, I am worried about potential injuries and not having the depth that he's going to want to run those guys out there. And to further that point, the reason he played 10 guys and played, spread the minutes out so much is because he asks his players to run the whole time they're out there. He doesn't want to, slow the ball down and take 10 seconds to dribble it up the court. He's a guy that you get the rebound and we're going straight to the basket to try to start scoring.
Well, and that's the thing with injuries. Like, let's say you have 3 injuries, you're down 8 players and you're running that fast up and down and you're running that kind of system. I'll be interested to see how we adjust, if we would have to adjust tempo, which would be hard. So hopefully that doesn't happen. I see Anthony, you're probably kidding because you said Debbie Downer. No, we talk about like everything we talk about, like, okay, what are the things you like? What are the things you don't? I can say, at least for the 3 of us, I can speak for Dalton too, because we talk enough. I think we're like very excited about the potential of this roster. But
be realistic, though.
you have to talk about all scenarios. Like, what's the best case scenario? What's the worst? I feel like best case scenario is we make a second weekend, and I say best case. I think worst case would be that we're like NIT bubble, and I think the middle ground is that we make it first weekend into the tournament. That's just me, though. I don't know about you guys.
Best case scenario, bro. Climb up that ladder and that's best case scenario.
Best case scenario is we win the whole daggone thing, but
I mean, really, I know that's like dream scenario, but could you imagine the time? I mean, they make a 30 out of 30. A guy comes in here, replaces the whole roster, and you win a national championship.
He said, "What if I told you a broken program?"
Yeah,
can get over.
Hey,
but
that would be absolutely insane. That'd be the biggest turnaround in sports history.
It would be the biggest college basketball story, quite literally of all time. But again, you go back to this 11-player situation, and that's why people say, well, we've got Corin Johnson and Hepburn and Rain Smith, and we got some other guys that can play guard. Keyword can play guard doesn't mean they are guards. Like Javon Hadley, can he play guard? Sure. Is he a guard? Not really. He's more of a 4. Same thing with the Boubacar Traore. Again, it goes back to the discussions we've had the past couple seasons. Just because you can dribble a basketball, pass it, and make an occasional 3 does not make you a guard. Now, could they be like a pseudo guard in a positionless basketball scheme? Sure, depending on the personnel on the court. But if one of the 3 of Edwards, Johnson, or one of those 2 mainly, and Rain Smith goes down, your backcourt is very thin. So that's why I thought that addressing the backup guard spot and possibly why Louisville is still looking to add another player, despite having the scholarships filled, it makes sense. Because back to Kyle's point, if you're running that system, and Pat said it best, what happens if you do have a couple of injuries? Do you change your identity? Do you go away from what you're trying to teach your team and you slow it down, but you realize that that's not your forte as a coach? That's why there's so much risk with these 2 redshirt guys, to the point where it's like it almost makes too much sense to go out and get a proverbial 14th player on this team.
Yeah.
I knew who Blue Collar Boy was in the Discord based on the way he types and his emoji. It's weird how you can see somebody type and be like, I bet I know who that is. And then he just tagged me on there. I was like, quit being a party pooper. So I know it's him because he said that in the chat. And I was like, I bet that's who that is. But no. I think we're all pretty optimistic. I mean, if you watched last week's episode, especially, we were like really excited because that was right after we landed Pryor. We knew Waterman was coming. But yeah, I think that it's hard to really predict what a new staff is going to do that you've never seen with these players. But I think we have the potential to be a second weekend team. I really do. Now, a lot has to line up to make that happen, I think. But I think we can. And, I mean, to Dalton's point, you never know. I mean, there's teams that – I mean, hell, Jerome Tang took a really bad K-State team and was one basket away from making a Final Four. So it can happen. It does take some luck, too. It takes a little bit of luck, and it takes a lot of skill. But I don't know, man. I'm just over the moon with where this roster could end up being. The style of play, with these type of athletes, like it's weird because I probably watched 7 or 8 College of Charleston games in their entirety since he was hired here. I've went back and been able to find some over the last like 2 or 3 years. And every time I watched, I was like, man, I wonder what he would do if he had more athletic players, like P6 level players in this kind of system, what it would look like. Because you can tell what he's trying to do, but they're very limited due to the level of competition and resources you have at that level. So now you got Chucky Hepburn, you've got Corin Johnson, you've got Boubacar Traore, who for his small frame plays way bigger than he is due to his athleticism and strength. those kind of guys. And then you had James Scott, who he did have at College of Charleston, but he was very young and raw, who has a ton of athleticism. Kason Pryor out there dribbling between his legs, doing step back threes at 6'10". I can't wait to see that shit, man. Like that in a PK system. I cannot wait till that schedule comes out, man, because I'm not gonna be able to make all the games living up here where I live. But I want to be at that first home game for sure. I want to make about 5 or 6 games. But that very first regular season home game is a must. Yeah. That's a moment in history, and I think it's going to be a good moment.
Yeah, I think, now that the roster's complete, a couple things. For one, the next thing I'm pumped about is to hear about practices, hear about the players and what they look like. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't been able to say that I guess I was excited KP's first year, although our lack of guards definitely put a big buzzkill into that. And Max last year, I was not too excited before that year started. So this is the first year in a while where I'm like, dude, I can't wait to get on message boards and get in the Discord and get on Twitter and hear about this player is doing this in practice.
Yeah.
So I'm pumped about that. I'm pumped about being able to go to open practices. And I was listening to the radio today, and I forget who mentioned it, but it sounds like PK wants to or PK and us in Indiana are trying to get some charity game, exhibition game for before the season, which I think.
You mean to tell me that we're going to play at Assembly Hall before Calipari does?
It sounds like that's not going to be an exhibition game now. It sounds like that's going to be a regular season game, which you guys know I'm all about. I think we should play IU every single year, but I'm also biased.
That would be. I'd be fine with that. I mean,
now,
it's like
when we played them during the KP era, I did not, because I didn't want to play anybody. I was living up here. Man, Anthony Edwards just hit that from Bullitt County. Anyway, he playing IU under the KP era, like I told the guys, I don't even want to hear it. I don't want to hear a word. Like all these guys up here that are IU fans don't want to hear about it. And then when I thought we were going to beat them, because we came damn close, we went on a big run and then we lost. Yeah, I'm excited again about playing them. I think we should play IU every single season. I did want to address, before we move on, I want to address Trent's comment since he donated. Thank you for the donation, Trent. He says he would trade this roster for Bambo and Frankie Hughes. Well, there are credible sources out there, Trent, that say that Frankie Hughes could be added to the roster as a fourth guard. There's a lot of
dude. We're PK's breaking out all the stops, but
Frankie Hughes is a person to keep an eye on.
Pat said it best. I mean, I keep coming back to this term like excitement, anticipation, and Kyle. I mean, it feels like, brother, we've just been so apathetic. And when your fan base gets apathetic, it's worse than being disappointed when people just stop caring overall. And a good portion of the family, you saw it with attendance. People tried to fluff the attendance numbers. No, you could see the stands on TV if you were watching it at that point. But I think for two reasons. Number one, it's great that Louisville's put together this roster because you want to be competitive once again. But I would argue it's even more important. People are like, oh, I just want to see some improvement. No, there is 100% legitimate urgency for this to be a good season for Louisville because, number one, the fan base effing needs it. It needs it. It's time for this brand to get built back up. There is none of this multiple year rebuild stuff. Now, maybe year one under Pat Kelsey with a whole new team. No, the expectation is still the NCAA tournament. I do not care what anyone says. It was NCAA tournament in year 2 of Kenny Payne or year 0.5 or whatever year we were calling it. That was the expectation. It doesn't matter. Without the NCAA cloud, the expectations to make the NCAA tournament at the very minimum. And that doesn't change with the coach. The transfer portal allows you to completely overhaul your team. Now you do have a whole new roster, so maybe there's a little bit of slack you can cut. But Pat Kelsey even said it in the press conference. If you don't plan on winning, don't even put your shoes on, man. This isn't a rebuild type place. You have all the opportunities at your disposal. No, you have to go out there and put your best foot forward and put your shoes on, metaphorically speaking, because it's time to bring this brand up. And we're on the clock, y'all. We need to bring it back quickly, not only for the fans, but for the downtown financials and much more. So let's get out of this whole out of this whole mindset of, well, I just want to be 12, 13 wins. No. NCAA tournament, especially with this roster, this is a top 5 team in the ACC.
Yeah. So to carry that topic on, I did want to mention that a recruit that committed, a portal transfer recruit, their family was actually got to meet Pat Kelsey when they had a conversation with them on a visit. And it was an intense, like in a good way. He was intense. The guy reported, he said, your all's coach is intense, man. And he talked about the Final Four repeatedly. He continued to talk about the expectation here is to make Final Fours, and everything he talked about was, this is what I'm wanting to do to make the Final Four. Mm-hmm. So to go from what we did to like, it's going to take 25 years to make the NIT, and you guys should expect that. Well, to go from, I'm exaggerating, but to go from, the years long, the 4 or 5 year rebuild, which is legitimately what he wanted. He wanted a 4 to 5 year rebuild, to let's talk about Final Fours and what it's going to take. Like that is such a 180. And that's exactly what we needed. I think that's another reason I'm real excited is we've wiped the slate completely clean. Like I love the people on various platforms that aren't from Louisville, that are just, trying to grade college basketball portal, like portal classes, head coaches and all that. And not every time, but a lot of the times I see Louisville graded, it's with the slight of, well, there's a lot to fix there because, the last regime, I mean, they just weren't good. So they've got a lot to rebuild there. No, we don't.
Yeah.
We do not. We have nothing. We have one walk-on from that time period. That's it. And he's going to be at the end of the bench. And other than that, it's like, okay, it'd be like if I took this house I lived in that was like, had all kind of problems, septic issues, electric was going out, all kind of broken windows, daggone insulation falling through the attic all over my
who's performing your inspection?
I know.
Do you have Trent performing your inspection?
That goes back to the hiring of Kenny Payne. But anyway, that's a good question, Dalton. But let's just say that's the situation I'm in my house. The house is falling apart. I'm selling it as is for $50,000. It's like there's a lot wrong. Somebody comes in here and just destroys it and tears it all down. And then you come back and they've got this completely new, modernized, remodeled home. And then somebody else, like a neighbor, comes by and goes, I wouldn't buy that house. I mean, man, you should have seen it before. But meanwhile, you're in here, you got a basement with a walkout closet. You've got all kind of like beautiful, up-to-date, smart light switches. Like brand new AC, roof is immaculate, everything's just tip top, granite countertops, and this guy's in here telling me that the house is a disaster because before the insulation was falling from the attic. Like, I don't care about what happened before. That's not who we are now. And so that's the beautiful part of this, is we are not starting from where we were. We are starting over completely new, and that's what the NIL and the transfer portal get you. And PK understands that. That's the best part of this. Yeah. Like we didn't have to wait and see, is he ever going to figure out how to recruit at our level compared to College of Charleston? No, we figured that out in about like 1 week. Like all the guys we ran on, we were like, okay, yeah, this guy totally gets it.
Yeah. I'm caught up on, have you ever seen a basement with a walkout closet?
I'm in a walkout
A walkout closet would be pretty cool, like a glass
Like,
closet.
my brother in Christ, what kind of basement are you building in? Let me get in contact with your
that was poor phrasing.
He's building that unicorn basement. He wants Wimbayana on his
you know what,
that would be kind of badass.
You know what kind of gets me with how good this roster construction is? Like there's one aspect of this whole thing that like I keep coming back to, and it just kind of makes me laugh. We literally have a incoming freshman that like by 24/7 Sports is ranked as like a top 10 recruit in program history. Yes. And he's just not being discussed that much because of how well Pat Kelsey went out and did. He didn't just recruit well. Don't get me wrong. He got some players.
Yep.
Kyle, you mentioned it a couple times. These statements that he made along the way. He started it out. He said, okay, I'm for real. I got a commitment from Terrence Edwards. That was the first statement. Everybody's like, ooh, okay. Here's the kitchen. Let's see what you can cook up. And he got some players that made sense. I mean, he got some very, very good players, Hepburn, Johnson, and company, but he needed that front court difference maker. And we're all thinking, well, it's going to be one of Noah Waterman or Kenai Roots likely. Bro comes out of nowhere and brings in Case and Pryor and drops another bomb, makes another statement. And not only that, he gets both of the other two. So I think this was as much of Louisville building the roster back up, but it's also Kelsey showing the rest of the country that said, hey, you doubted if I could recruit really well here? Let me cook.
Yeah. Well, to kind of expand on both of your guys' points here, and to make it, when you look at the landscape of college basketball right now in the transfer portal, and this is kind of what rubbed me the wrong way immediately with Kenny Payne, but there's really no such thing as a rebuild anymore. You can't say, hey, I'm going to go out, build a new team, get a bunch of freshmen, bring them along, and 3 years from now, you're going to see the fruits of my labor. That doesn't work in today's college basketball because half of those freshmen are going to leave and go to another school. So having a coach that understands that and isn't going to come in here and say, hey, I need a few years to rebuild this roster and establish my culture. No, man, you need 1 year to go get your guys. And listen, he did a perfect job. And I think we've got a tournament team. I think people would have been forgiving if he rebuilt the whole roster and put together a team that was very competitive. And maybe this team doesn't make the tournament, but a very competitive team that was on the bubble and doesn't make the tournament. But the fact that he was like, listen, I came here to win. I didn't come here to build a program in 3 years. Am I going to rebuild the program's image? Sure. But am I going to rebuild the roster? No, I'm going to completely overhaul it in 1 year. And I'm going to throw the ball out there with the guys that I want and that fit my system, or at least I think they do. And we're going to try to win as many damn games as we can and go as far as we can in the NCAA tournament. And you've got to respect them. We've got to see the results of that. But on paper, I think he's done that. And it's just refreshing for the head coach to come in here and not make any excuses. And not only not make any excuses, but go out there and attack it from day one and get it done, man.
Yep. I agree. And whenever you get, just real quick, Kyle, whenever you get, it goes back to the press conference, like we just wanted a coach that understood us. It felt like there was such a disconnect between the fan base and the expectations. And I will say, I don't like to talk bad about Kenny. But one of the things that really appalled me was that a former player of this university couldn't connect with the fan base and get on the same wavelength. That literally is something that I still just wonder what in the hell happened to this day to cause that huge disconnect. And I don't, it is what it is. It's all bygones be bygones at this point. But to have a guy who really doesn't have any legitimate ties to Louisville outside of maybe having some like distant family in the city or close to the city and being up the I-71 North Corridor, for him to come in right away and tell us what we want to hear, now whether he believes it or not, at least you're saying it to where the fan base doesn't feel alienated, like, oh, well, I had to be talked into this job. No, I ran to this job when I was called. That's why, man, I am stoked for the basketball season. And it's been since pre-pandemic since I can say that. And it's sad, but it's relieving at the same time, because even if there are some struggles this season, I do feel like Pat Kelsey could definitely be the guy. So
yeah, and I think he does really feel that way because his actions show it. I mean, you don't spend the amount of time he is hauling ass. I mean, let's face it, we missed on some portal guys. It's not like we picked 11 guys and all 11 were like, yeah, we'll join Louisville. That's fine. We had a ton. I mean, look, just to show how hard he worked. I mean, think back to, I know Dante Maddox visited.
Yep.
He ended up not committing to us. Ben Hummerhouse, Nick Boyd. Who else? We had Osabor. I mean, we had a lot of guys that came in, and it's like, okay, we have to pivot. And sometimes we had to pivot twice. But we continue to just find more and more dig and just figure out, like, hey, we can get the guys we need. The whole getting Noah Waterman out of BYU at JQ, I totally forgot about JQ. I don't know how. That should have been my first example. But JQ, we spent a lot of time and effort on him, and it became clear as day that the demands were just not going to be met. And that took a lot of time, and we had to pivot. Yeah, JQ, Osabor, like all those guys up in the front court, that's a lot of work, a lot of time and effort put in. And again, you have to do this all in about 2 months, because that's when the portal dries up. Portal opens up middle of March. By middle of May, if you're still trying to fill 5 or 6 spots, good luck, because you're not going to get anybody of a high quality. So it's like, okay, we missed on that guy. Like, you have to meet – hell, unless they recruit to you on site, you have to be talking to the guy that you want in his place. Like, let's say Osabor's on a visit and you don't feel like he's going to come in on a visit. You probably got Case and Pryor on the phone as you're like, hey, I got to go use the bathroom real fast. I'll be right back. Just give me about 10 minutes. You're in there calling Case and Pryor like, what's up, man? Hey, I can't stop thinking about the way you would fit our system, man. You're a perfect guy. We need you on a visit. And then you go back in there and you order a steak at Jeff Ruby's with great Osabor. And then maybe he commits on the spot, but you can't even take that damn chance. So it's like that, dude. It's one thing to do that with like 3 or 4 spots open, even 5 or 6. But when you have a complete blank slate, that's a crazy, radical way to recruit. And you've really got to put everything into it. And I mean, let's be honest, guys, he will never have to put this much into a future class. He's going to have at least a few people return in every single class. He will never have to start from completely over and revamp an entire team in 2 months. And that's why I give him an A for the portal class.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. And like you said, Kyle, when you have a plan, which Pat Kelsey obviously had a plan, and it wasn't just a plan of these are the 15 players I'm going to go after. He had a deep bag of guys he wanted. And when you have that plan and you can pivot, it means that you don't have to succumb to demands of players like a JQ, and that you don't have to do something that you're uncomfortable with because you don't have other options. I mean, honestly, of all the things I think I'm most impressed about, I think you hit on it. It's that there was a plan in place and that he could pivot to options that still made sense and were still very high quality players.
Yeah.
I don't put it this way. it's always going to be a situation where you have to re-recruit your roster every year. I mean, that's just how college sports is now. But one of the main reasons, not main reasons, there's like 36 main reasons, it feels like, why I am excited about what Kelsey's done. He's added the immediate help that you need, but there's also a maximum of 5 guys that could come back next season. And like Kyle said, if you can get more selective, you don't have as much pressure on you to flip the whole roster, and you can prioritize certain players and not have to feel like you have to take a commitment because of the numbers game.
And the high school class. You have all
high
year
school
to get,
class. So you have all year for that. I do want to address one comment because I think it's sort of an extension of what we talked about. Joe says he disagrees with me that he doesn't think Pat Kelsey promised Chucky, Kaysen, or Terrence a starting spot. Okay, this is where things get a little bit interesting because, look, you're not bringing in a player of that caliber without basically guaranteeing him what he wants to hear. That's why the whole minutes distribution thing, like those 3 guys are going to play the most minutes. Yes, I do think, Pat, that you change a little bit of your coaching philosophy when you coach a Power 5 team because you're dealing with more star-level potential NBA draft caliber players. But look, Chucky Hepburn is not starting over 100 games in the Big Ten over the past 3 years to come off the bench. That's not happening. Terrence Edwards isn't winning the Sun Belt Player of the Year to come off the bench. Kaysen Pryor is not having these big-time programs after him to come off the bench. Now, granted, you do have to earn it, but there is a distinct difference between promising a 16-year-old that has not played one collegiate minute, number one, a boatload of NIL, and number 2, a starting spot. But if you have that college-level production, look, you're not in today's realm. From what I can tell you about talking to agents and knowing some of the demands out there from some big players, one of the almost universal ones that is no secret, it's where the top guys in high school go with. Same thing with top transfers. They want to come in and they want to know that they're going to start, because why transfer to a place that you're not going to? So that might not have been the pitch for all of these players, but there's definitely probably those 3 that are definitely going to be starting and probably have been guaranteed to start, whether we hear that publicly or not, which, spoiler alert, we will not.
And with 3 guys like that, I think when you contact them and recruit them, that's assumed. I mean,
right.
I mean, I'm sure they're checking to make sure, but if I'm one of those guys, I'm like, anybody that's recruiting me is recruiting me as a starting point guard if I'm Hepburn, or as a starting 3, 4, or 5 if I'm Pryor, or as a starting 2 or 3 if I'm Edwards. So, I mean, even if it wasn't said explicitly, like, hey, guys, we promise you're starting, I think it was inferred in some way.
There will be some interesting there's going to be a lot of interesting stuff with the minute distribution. Like I look at a guy like Javon Hadley, very good player, played the 2nd highest minutes, I believe, at Colorado, and they had a lot of really good players. And I don't know why it took them so long to get warmed up, but once they all put it together, man, they were rolling. And then you saw it in the tournament, what they did. So he had the 2nd most minutes, to my understanding, on the team. But then I look at him here, it's like, okay, we got Chucky, you got Corn Johnson, who's going to get a lot of minutes. Rain Smith, by the way, we haven't even really touched on him. He's PK's most experienced player right now from College of Charleston, and an absolute sniper from 3-point land. So he will get plenty of time, and he can make a big difference with that ability. And then you get guys like, Abubakar Traore at the 4 with Kaysen Pryor. Like there's going to be somebody is going to take a big minutes cut. I don't know who it's going to be. I use those 2 guys as an example, Corn Johnson and Javon Hadley, but it's not because of anything with their game, and it may not be them. Maybe they're the guys that get the most minutes. And then you look at a guy like a Noah Waterman, and he doesn't get the minutes that somebody's going to eat some minutes somewhere. And then, of course, you have the whole group of people that say, well, James Scott's going to take a huge leap. Well, if James Scott takes a huge leap, that's going to cut in a lot of minutes too. So it's more of a thing of interest for me to see who separates themselves as the primary guys. I think you got Chucky, obviously, who's going to be the point guard. That's, Terrence Edwards is going to play and play a lot. I think we know those two. I would say Case and Pryor probably gets a ton of time, but beyond those three, I think there's going to be some really interesting battles to get minutes.
Well, and there's going to be battles, and I think minutes are going to go up and down depending on one matchup.
Yeah.
You're gonna, which is what's great about the roster, is you can match up in different ways. And two, there's going to be times where, and you saw this a lot with Rick Pitino when he was here, there's going to be times where a player is producing and playing very well and another player isn't. And that might happen a third of the way through the year, and the minutes kind of switch. And maybe then, 10 games later, it switches back because Rick liked to play the hot hand in certain situations. And I think you'll see the same thing here. But no, I think it goes back to what I kind of said at the beginning of the show is, for this team to reach their full potential, guys are going to have to buy into new roles that they didn't have at their old school. And in some cases, it's going to be lesser roles. And I think PK was smart enough during this recruiting process to probably tell certain guys like, hey, you might have played 30 minutes at your school. Here, you're not going to get 30 minutes. But no, I think it's, if you look at our roster, I think somebody put on the 247 boards everybody's stats at their old school. And I think most of these guys that are coming over played 30 minutes a game, and you don't have enough minutes to play everybody 30 minutes a game. So, yeah, there's going to have to be some roles that are cut from what people were used to last year at their old schools for sure.
There has to be a level of unselfishness. Rain Smith is sort of like a dark horse starting candidate because, especially right away, I mean, he knows what Pat Kelsey is looking for, and for a roster that is brand new, having that experience, not only, playing for Pat Kelsey, but just overall college experience. Rain Smith could be like that Ryan McMahon-esque starter his senior year, to where he might not play the majority of the games, but he's going to be relied upon a ton to be like the shooter, even though he's more than just a shooter. But fellas, I have a hot take. Koren Johnson's going to lead this team in scoring. That's my hot take.
I've thought the same thing, like not consistently, but I've had that thought. And I think I've even answered that to somebody like, who are you most excited about? And I said, I think Koren Johnson could be that dude. I don't know if he'll average more than Terrence Edwards. I'm not confident enough to say it, or even Pryor, now that Pryor's in the fold. But before Pryor was added, I was like, man, it could be Koren Johnson. I still have that fleeting thought, Dalton, because he has that ability. He is a spark plug.
I think a less hot take in that realm is that Koren Johnson will lead us in scoring in, various games, 5+ games. Because he just has that ability, like I said earlier, before you hopped on, Dalton. He has that ability to score a bunch of points in a short amount of time.
I mean, he was Washington's best player down the stretch last month of the season. And if he's not leading the team in scoring, I think it's a usage situation then, to where he's, not getting the amount of shots that Edwards and Pryor are. I do wonder – I think Case and Pryor is one hell of a player. I wonder what the efficiency numbers look like when he goes from being one of to probably the focal point on offense, one of the two focal points, to where when he's got that level of defensive attention, can he still have that same effect and those same efficiency numbers? I do think that Koren Johnson can handle that. I think that Koren Johnson has all the makings of like an Isaiah Wong type guy. Like, my hot take that I will hitch my wagon to at the moment is that Koren Johnson will be an all ACC level player. So that's just sort of where I'm sitting.
Yeah. When you make an interesting point about Pryor, who I'm super excited about. But of all the guys, when you look at their year-to-year progressions, Pryor took a huge leap last year. He transferred out of Boise State. I don't have the stats in front of me right now, but I believe he averaged like
3 points a game.
3 points a game at Boise State, and goes over to South Florida, which probably plays in a better league, and ups his game to 17-7. So I mean, there's no way that's a flash in the pan of any sorts. But he like, to your point, can he keep that efficiency as he, one, steps up another level, and two, if he's asked to do more here and is more of a focal point than he was at South Florida? I think that's an interesting question that we'll have to see how it's answered when the season gets going.
Well, guys, Callie is down here, and she is wild. So if you can hear in the background, I'm sorry. I think that she is not going to put up with this much longer. I did want to say, before we conclude the episode tonight, on Friday night, we have not talked much about football lately. There hasn't been as much to talk about, and basketball has taken precedence. But Ty Elliott, one of our co-hosts, is going to have a couple of football. I would say they are two of the most knowledgeable Louisville football fans you'll ever meet. Trace and Trent, they're supposed to be on with him Friday night to break down the entire roster. And as you guys know, they are big-time football nerds. Like, they get really into it. If you're a football head and you really want to, and you're craving some more football information, I would tune into that episode on Friday night. It'd be same time, 9:00. I didn't want to forget that, so I had it written down here. But with that being said, guys, Dalton, I appreciate you being on. You guys can find Dalton on Locked On Louisville on YouTube, and you can find Dalton Pence, D Pence, Twitter handle. X handle. Elon. Thanks, Elon. But Dalton, we appreciate you being on here, man. Do you have any final thoughts?
I'm glad you asked. First off, how do I word this? I think that we've neglected this for too long, guys. The statue of like a Louisville Mount Rushmore, it needs to go up. And Maverick Rowan's got to be on that statue, fellas. Cat Barbara as well.
Frankie Hughes.
I think Frankie Hughes has to be on there. And then also Keontae Vernon. For those that know that
Antonio Blakeney, man.
No, we don't speak of that name here.
But
nah, man, don't really have much else to say. Appreciate y'all tuning. I feel like I'm on Locked On right now. It's been really awesome to see this show grow. I remember the first episode like it was yesterday. So, just being able to be on the show is great. And then seeing how it's grown and the following has grown and the chat continued to pop off, y'all, on episode 84 is just great to see. So appreciate y'all, and keep doing what you're doing, fellas.
Thank you, man. Pat, you got any final words?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say a couple things. One, Dalton, thanks for coming on. I admire Dalton and his Locked On Louisville podcast because, yes, he has guests on there every so often, but Dalton has to do a podcast all by himself. And I think
every day.
Yeah. I think about me trying to do that and how bad it would be. So Dalton, you do an awesome job at that. And really, man, or everybody out there, if you haven't checked out Locked On Louisville, do it, because it's an awesome Louisville-based podcast, and he fills you in every day on what's going on in
every
Cardination.
day.
Respect that. I appreciate the love.
So do that, and also one thing we struggle with here that I will say at the end of the episode, I should start saying it at the beginning of the episode, but like and subscribe here to the Third Banner Pod.
I thought about it earlier.
Algorithm.
I never got a chance, but I'm bad at it too.
And also, again, I said this on Friday's episode. When you subscribe, it'll tell you when we're having an episode. We try to give details on the episodes when we post them up for the time and stuff that we're going to play it. Obviously, that's 9 every night on Wednesday and Fridays, but it'll tell you what we're going to discuss, and that way and I know, like on Fridays, it might not be an episode for you if we're talking about, maybe this Friday you don't like football and you don't want to watch that, but subscribe, because we talk about so much. There's going to be something you want to listen to, and it's a good way to find out what we're talking about.
And also, we're heading into the dark ages, which is where there's no sports. The basketball portal recruiting ending is the beginning of the dark ages. Winter is coming, Game of Thrones fans. It's here. The Night King is running around the Louisville area, and we're all hiding in our walkout closets in our bed. No, I'm just kidding. So I still can't believe I said walkout closet, but seriously, if there's anything that you guys want to hear as an audience, that you got any ideas you have for the pod, because again, there's only so much you can talk about that doesn't come off as repetitive if you just continue to talk about what's happening in Louisville football, Louisville basketball, because those are the two biggest ones. And the answer is basically nothing from about now to fall practice starting up. In football, you don't get a whole lot. You'll get some summer workouts. You'll get a schedule release. You'll rah about that for 15 or 20 minutes, and then what? So if you guys have ideas of discussion points, of topics you like to hear about, themes you would like, anything, just let me know. Send me a DM on Twitter or to the Third Banner Pod Twitter account. Send it to us, and we'll talk about it because we appreciate feedback. So I did want to say that. But with that being said, guys, I think we are going to wrap this episode up. Patrick, Kelsey, great job. Staff, great job landing us a full roster in less than 2 months, and a competitive roster at that. It should be a lot of excitement. And again, wanted to plug one final time. Football heads, Friday, we will have a football-loaded episode. Ty Elliott will be leading the charge. He will have Trent, and he will have Trace on, and they are both – You'll want to hear about it. Trust me. So that being said, guys, thank you all again. Thank you again, Dalton, for being on. And that concludes another episode of the Third Banner Pod. We will end it with a Go Cards.
Go Cards.